Hi everyone, Brunch is here. It is a little bit after 4 on Monday, the 6th of April. I'm sorry I'm late in getting to this. Like you, I'm pretty snowed under. Today I'm going to talk with you about the Coquette, more specifically about the novel. Last time I just gave you a little bit of background on novels in 18th century United States. Today I'm going to talk more specifically about this novel by Hannah Webster Foster. I think in my last video I kept saying the book is by Eliza Wharton. Eliza Wharton is our protagonist. Sorry about that. So I have Google Slides posted with very specific page numbers, and I'll get your questions posted in a couple of minutes after I finish this video. I hope you have read the novel. It's wonderful. It is a novel of seduction. As I told you last time, that's a really popular form in the 18th century. Pamela and Clarissa by Samuel Richardson, written in the 1840s, also two novels of seduction. The novel of seduction is exactly what it sounds like. It's about the loss of virtue on the part of a young woman, either willingly or through rape. That's the situation for Clarissa, but either way, a woman who loses her virtue and what happens to her. This is also an epistolary, I'll say more about that in a second. This is also an epistolary novel. An epistle is a letter, and the story is told through letters. Eliza, her friend Lucy Summer, initially Lucy Freeman, she gets married, she becomes Lucy Summer, Julia Granby, Peter Sanford, who is the rake or the bad guy. A rake is sort of 18th century parlance for a player, what we would call, a player, a guy who sleeps around, not very virtuous. All these characters write letters to one another, and the story is therefore told through their eyes. But Eliza is always our central consciousness. We're always most interested in what happens to Eliza. She's the main voice of the novel and the most important person in the novel. So a quick word about the novel of seduction and what Hannah Webster Foster is doing in this novel. So when we talk about a novel of seduction, readers typically tend to think that it's sort of a cautionary tale. This is what happens to a woman when she exposes herself to men of questionable virtue. These are the consequences for a woman who violates the sphere, women's sphere, which, as you'll recall, I talked about with you when we were studying Judith Sargent Murray. And that is true. This is a novel about a woman who falls in love with, I think, Peter Sanford, the rake. And she, spoiler alert, if you haven't read the book yet, she becomes pregnant and dies alone and afraid in an inn in Connecticut. So on the one hand, yes, very much the consequences of losing your virtue outside of marriage, having sex outside of marriage, particularly with a bad guy like Peter Sanford. But Foster is doing something more interesting here. Eliza's loss of virtue comes about not just because she's foolish. She's not young. Take a look at how old she is. Look at the very end of the novel. What Foster seems to be calling attention to is the very difficult situation of an educated, intelligent woman in 18th century America, given how limited her options are. So Foster is not just showing us Eliza's punishment as a consequence of her violation of the social order. Foster is also saying, look at this society. Look at what the options are for a woman of Eliza's talents and temperament and intellect. All her choices are terrible. The Reverend Boyer is a stick in the mud. We don't like him. The novel doesn't want us to like him. Peter Sanford is a sleazeball, but he's at least witty and fun. So essentially, Eliza is presented with two bad choices. Either one is going to lead her to unhappiness. She does not want either one. And so the novel doesn't give us an easy answer. It's not as though it says, stupid Eliza, you should have married Peter Boyer. He's boring, but you would have been better off. Certainly Eliza has a moment in the novel where she thinks that, but I don't think the novel really encourages that feeling. Boyer's a dud. But Sanford is not a very good choice either. And so Eliza is kind of trapped. She lives in a society that traps women, that gives them very few options. And what we watch in this novel is her kind of unraveling in the middle of this unfair, limited social setup. Okay? So I've spelled out for you in the slides the central themes and topics and issues in the novel. I've given you page numbers for each one. The novel is asking us questions about marriage. It's asking us questions, asking us to think about notions of femininity and masculinity, what those social norms are, if they're good, if they're bad. Is there another way for us to think about this? The novel asks us to think about authority, parental authority, social authority. Eliza is violating authority all over the place. Is that good? Is that bad? It's asking us to think a lot about virtue. Male virtue, yes, and also female virtue, not surprisingly. And whether our notions of female virtue are fair, if they are too limited, what Eliza's options are in this very rigid society with very rigid ideas about virtue, excuse me. So I'm going to leave you there with that. Go look at slides, check out the pages that I have pointed you to that illustrate the specific topics. I'm just going to leave you with sort of one specific statement about Eliza's condition, the predicament in which she finds herself. So I'm on page 869. We're seeing a conversation here. Eliza is telling her friend Lucy about a conversation between her and Peter Sanford. He's saying to her, well, are you going to marry this guy Boyer? Are you engaged to this guy Boyer? And he says, your friends are influencing you to marry this guy Boyer. And Eliza says, so while Sanford is a rake and a bad guy, he really pushes Eliza to think about her situation in a way that certainly Mr. Boyer is never going to do. So he's pressuring her. He's like, are you going to marry this guy Boyer? Your friends all want you to marry this guy Boyer. And Eliza says, bottom of page 869, my friends, sir, will not control. They will only advise to what they think most for my interest, and I hope that my conduct will not be unworthy of their approbation. Pardon me, my dear Eliza, said he, if I am impertinent. It is my regard for you which impels me to the presumption. Do you intend to give your hand to Mr. Boyer? I do not intend to give my hand to any man at present. I have but lately entered society. Remember, she was married to Mr. Haley, and he dies. She was engaged to Mr. Haley. I have but lately entered society, and wish for a while to enjoy my freedom in the participation of pleasures suited to my age and sex. These, said he, you are aware, I suppose, when you form a connection with that man, with Mr. Boyer, you must renounce and content yourself with a confinement to the tedious round of domestic duties, the pedantic conversation of scholars, and the invidious criticisms of a whole town. In other words, he's saying, you realize that you marry this guy Boyer and you're going to have to give up all that fun. Being married to a minister, he says, is really hard, and you're going to have to just be a domestic woman and listen to reverend ministers sitting around arguing about, whether or not we're among the elect. And you all know how exciting that is. So she says to that, I have been accustomed, said I, and am therefore attached to men of letters, because remember, her father was a minister. And as to the praise or censure of the populace, I hope always to enjoy that approbation of conscience which will render me superior to both. In other words, I'm going to do what I think is right. I'm going to follow my own conscience. I'm going to exert freedom according to my own notions of virtue. Well, The novel asks us to think very hard, given what happens to Eliza, whether or not this is even possible for a woman. Does Eliza have access to the kind of freedom that she wants to have? Should she have it? Would it be right for her to have it? Novel asks that question as well. So go and read. We have an optional meeting tomorrow at 9:30. I will send you the link out for that. And then a required synchronous session on Thursday at 9:30 where we can talk about this book and about your research papers and whatever else is on your mind then. Hope you all are okay. Scary couple of weeks coming up. The curve is going up, or whatever it is curves do. So take care of yourselves, and I will talk to you in the next couple of days. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.